respects to elders past, present and those emerging. This session is being recorded and will become available next week in the PHN Education Library, which is on our website. We will be using Slido for questions and the session evaluation survey. We will require that you fill out the evaluation survey in Slido to receive a certificate of attendance. You can access the evaluation polls and question and answer tabs on the right-hand side of your screen, or alternatively, head to slido.com and enter the event code MPA. Please type your questions in throughout the session and we'll endeavour to answer them. It's now my pleasure to introduce today's speakers. We have Cathy Bainey, and Cathy is the Academic Director of the Health Program for the University of New England Partnerships. Cathy has a long career and experience in the health industry, much of this being spent in primary health care. Cathy is a registered nurse and a certified practice manager, having managed both general, multidisciplinary and specialist practices. Other roles include accreditation surveyor and practice management advisor to the New South Wales Australian Medical Association. Cathy consults nationally to both general and specialist practices. Cathy is Director of Western New South Wales Primary Health Network and Fellow of the AAPM. She is a firm believer that practice managers are key in the development and delivery of strong systems of leadership and management, enabling the delivery of quality care in the Australian primary health sector. We also have Kat Ryan, and Kat has over 20 years' experience in general practice. Kat is a practice manager and medical practice assistant of a rural solo general practice in the Southern Riverina area. Kat is an accreditation surveyor and previously held a role as trainer and assessor with the University of New England Partnerships for the Certificate for Medical Practice Assisting course. In reorienting her for general practice toward a preventative health approach, Kat has successfully introduced the role of medical assistants in developing innovative models of care. I'd like to now hand over to Cathy Bainey. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alison. It is lovely to be here today, back in the Hunter New England Central Coast PHN offices. I think the last time I was here was pre our very first lockdown, when we did a refresher on hand hygiene and how to keep your environment safe in the pandemic that we were about to experience. We have all come a very long way since then in our practices, and it's been a difficult time. So it is really lovely to be doing things and thinking about what our practices might look like going forward and what our workforce might look like going forward. I would like to add to Alison's welcome, a UNEP welcome. We acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we all meet today, elders past, present and emerging. So UNEP is an education and training company of New England, of the University of New England. And we introduced the MPA course around about 7 years ago. Some of you may have heard this presentation before, so we'll make it fairly brief. But about 7 years ago, someone who you all know, I think Gary Smith, had a vision that this role was very necessary in general practice, and he was right. So that started our journey at UNEP. The course prior to that had existed in Queensland. North Queensland PHN had been running this course for some time, And it's a course that's widely recognised overseas and widely used in America. And I think Kat has actually done some travels in America having a look at how the MPA role works in practices overseas. It's AQF level 4, the MPA course, and it has 23 units of study. The course sits within the National Health Training Package. So it's a well audited course that has a lot of compliance issues around it. It sits in good company. The other courses in that package that you would be familiar with, some of the ambulance courses sit in that package, dental assisting sits in that package, some of the pathology collection courses sit in that package. So it's a well recognised training program. Okay, just did that one. So the qualification of medical practice assistant includes a broad range of administrative functions in a practice and a broad range of clinical functions in a practice as well. They're completed under the direct or indirect supervision of a medical practitioner or a registered nurse. And I think this is where this qualification can be really useful in your practice, as it doesn't come with the same sorts of restrictions that an enrolled nurse does, where an enrolled nurse needs to have supervision from a registered nurse. You've got that flexibility with an MPA where the supervision can be provided by the doctors in your practice or a registered nurse. This makes it a little bit easier for flexibility. The healthcare professional who is providing the supervision, though, must actually agree to do this. So if you are building this role into your practice, it's important that whoever is taking on the supervisory capacity of an MPA has agreed to do so. If it's your registered nurse, then that is part of their job description. And we're going to talk a lot about HR shortly, but the fact that they are supervising an MPA needs to sit as part of their job role in your practice. And that's really important for your risk mitigation strategies and your compliance, that is noted as part of their job role. So they need to agree to it, they need to be committed to doing it, and it needs to be reflected in your compliance paperwork. So you can see that the team structure in a general practice is ideal working environment for an MPA. They are trained to be very flexible members of your team. So they have a lot of, they have an administrative function at the front desk. That extends into some management role as well. They can manage billing for you. They can do a lot of sort of operational administrative tasks that will actually allow the practice manager to step back and have a more strategic role in your practice. They have a lot of clinical task assisting roles that they perform, meaning that your registered nurses can be working to the top of their scope. Not only does that improve their own job satisfaction when they are working to the top of their scope, when you've got all your team working to the top of their scope as a practice manager, that means that you've got your team working to the top of their dollar as well. So it makes a lot of sense clinically in terms of health outcomes, and it makes a lot of sense from a business perspective as well. The medical practice assisting course, they study 3 solid units of first aid. So they are first aid and emergency responders as well in your practice. So you can see they're a really useful person to have around on a busy day in your practice. A little bit later, we're going to think about how you might be using the MPA role in your practice to make sure that everybody, that the role is being maximised, which then flows on to making sure that everyone else's role in the practice is also maximised. No question at the moment that we are experiencing a health workforce shortage, especially as we move to the rural and regional areas of New South Wales and right across the country. Health workforce is a major issue. We need to start thinking differently about how we do what we do. We've often used that adage that we need to work smarter. I don't think that that's ever been more apt than it is at the moment. So we need to think about using our teams and the skills that we have within our teams a little bit differently than we have done in the past. Step back and take a look at who you've got in your practice. And we're going to talk about that again in a little bit more depth a little bit later on. And I've already said this, that the MPA role in your practice allows everybody to work to the top of their scope, so that the MPA can focus on the task-based duties that free up your clinicians to maximise their face-to-face time with your patients. And for you as practice manager, not to be squeezing that really important role of strategic business management into tiny little gaps, but actually allowing you to step back and take those management duties away from the front desk and perform them with a lot more time on your hands, hopefully. So, as I said, a coordinated and multi-skilled team increases efficiencies, you have increased patient outcomes, and you have increased job satisfaction. And we'll take a look at how job satisfaction is so important when we move into the next session. I think as practice managers in general practice, we can never really separate business outcomes and patient outcomes. They parallel the whole time. We're constantly addressing both in our practices with equal importance. So having that coordinated multi-skilled team, of which an MPA is a vital component, really allows us to address both of those key performance indicators for us as practice managers. Okay, so just a quick look at what they do. And again, this is just an overview of the role for you this morning. We are going to take a much deeper dive into all these things a little bit later on. But they are crucial, and they do perform a crucial and complex role in your practice. And as I said before, the training is really comprehensive. It's really well mandated within the vet sector. And it means that you have got a well-qualified team member in your team. So we talked about admin tasks, I've talked about the clinical tasks, and I've talked about first aid. But our MPAs also do a lot of study around some of those other skills that are so important in our practices. So they do a whole unit on communicating and how to work effectively in your practice. If you think about your receptionists, they are the first and last touch point for our patients, for our customers in our practices. So it's really important that they have good communication skills, outwardly facing communication skills, but also inwardly facing communication skills. Our teams work very closely together. So that's a really important unit of study that they do. They also do a unit on working with diversity. So managing the different cultural backgrounds that we find coming to our practices as our patient base grows. A whole unit on working legally and ethically. So understanding the compliance and the laws and the framework within which we manage our practices. And I think responding effectively to behaviours of concern is an interesting unit that we do. And I think when I first started teaching this, it was kind of just another unit that we taught. But over the last 2.5 years, I think we have seen more behaviours of concern in our practices than I have done in the whole of my career in primary health, as the anxiety levels of our stress levels of our patients rose astronomically. So our MPAs are well trained to manage these unexpected behaviours that we sometimes experience from our practices as they are concerned and justifiably anxious about their health or the health of their loved ones. MPAs are also taught to understand medical terminology, and when Kat talks about how we use an MPA in the practice managing data, that will be obvious how important it is that they do understand that medical terminology. And supporting us, guys, they do a whole unit on managing accounts and a work health and safety unit. So they make really good work health and safety officers in your practice. So taking the responsibility for all your WHS requirements as well. Infection control is a standalone unit within the course, but it also underpins every single one of the clinical units that we teach. We don't need to talk about how important infection control always is, but has become on a whole new level for us. So they understand, protecting themselves, protecting our patients, and ensuring that we have a work environment that is as free from contamination as it possibly can be. Some of the other clinical tasks that our MPAs study in this course: maintaining medication stocks, so your ordering, your rotation of stock, and that's all stock, whether that's your samples, whether it's your dressings, your wound dressings and all those things. Most of us don't like to carry too much collateral in our stock cupboards, so it is important that you do have somebody monitoring that and rotating that and understanding the importance of that as it feeds into our infection control processes. MPAs also do a whole heap of learning on cold chain management. Enough said. Most of us have never carried as many vaccines in our practices as we do or have done over the last couple of years. Whether you are processing your instruments on site, doing your own sterilising on site, or sending them off to be sterilised, there are components of that process that need to be managed in your practice, and the MPAs are trained to understand both sterilisation on site and the transportation perhaps of contaminated instruments to another site for sterilisation. So I always like to break it down, and we'll do again a lot more on this later on in the session, but direct care and indirect care in terms of what the MPAs can do in your practice. So I think the direct care, that's that task-based, fairly obvious work that they do, taking clinical measurements, performing ECGs, all these units are taught very thoroughly, and supporting our health professionals in the delivery of other clinical care, such as audiometry, spirometry. We will do it again one day in our practices, taking blood sugar levels, all those sorts of things. That's the direct patient-facing care. They're also well trained to triage, so to manage your what's coming through the door in your waiting room, to be very observant of who's in your practice, and to triage those phone conversations that we have with our patients. We're not quite sure where to fit them into our very busy appointment books. Your MPAs are well trained to actually ask the right questions and to know where to fit that patient into the appointment schedule when they need to see a doctor. And also, of course, when you do have those emergencies in your practice, your MPAs are well trained in CPR and ready, willing and able to assist. So when we think about indirect patient care, this is a role that's going to become more and more important in our practices as we move to different ways that our practices are funded. There's a lot of talk about flexible funding models, grant funding, block funding. We can talk about that a little bit later on. So, and how we manage that funding in our practice. Obviously, if we do have funding like that, we're obviously going to want to maximise every dollar. So again, you're going to have to think about, well, who have I got in my team who's doing what? So your MPAs, we do a lot of work on care coordination and recalls and reminders. So they are well trained to take over these responsibilities in your practice, allowing your clinicians to continue with that face-to-face patient care. And of course, under our MBS fee structure, we know that we have to be patient-facing to bill a lot of those item numbers. And indirect care. Obviously, our MPAs can be used to support accreditation, which is fairly onerous at times in our practices, and also, and we'll show you how a little bit later on this afternoon, but also to assist with your requirements under PIP-QI. Just want to talk a little bit about the governance, the clinical governance of having an MPA in your practice, and we'll talk about the HR in just a moment. But it's important to note that this is a qualification, a well-recognised national qualification, and as such, you need to follow all your Fair Work compliance. So you would be making sure that your job description matched the role, that there was a thorough induction process, that your MPA had ongoing opportunities for CPD, as you would with any of your staff, that the supervision was in place, and I talked about that supervision needing to be agreed to, needing to be consented to. And if you do hopefully you carry a practice insurance policy, that this role is reflected in that practice insurance policy. Doing that alone is not enough. You actually have to ensure that the governance in your practice is in place, that you've crossed your T's and dotted all your I's as you would with any of your staff. And I'll give you some examples when we move into the HR session in just a moment. So who is suitable to train as an MPA? Well, anyone who works in a health practice is suitable. So general practice is ideal, and this is where most of our training has been done to date. Most of our students come from general practice. We do have students from other specialties. So specialties that are doing a lot of minor ops. We have an MPA in an endoscopy clinic. We have MPAs in dermatology clinics where there's a lot of procedural work. We've been talking to Ransco about MPAs working in ophthalmology as well, where there's a lot of assisting and procedural work that needs to be done, and a lot of equipment that needs to be managed. So the scope of the role is certainly broadening, but for those of us today, I think we're all general practice online, not entirely sure. An MPA is a perfect person to have in your team. If you are thinking about enrolling an MPA, or someone in your practice is actually commencing out on their MPA learning journey, then they will need your support. So the practice manager and the practice nurse and or doctor, you will need to assist them. The practice is going to need to support them and be behind this process. And there's obviously auditing, there's observation reports, and some compliance that we need signed off. You are the eyes in the practice. I guess you can see if the work is being done to the standard that it's supposed to be, and we need that affirmation from you. So it is a little bit of a team effort, but it does take a village, and the results are well worth it. There are about 6 days of face-to-face training over an 18 months to 2 years. Obviously with COVID, a lot of our students and learning has slowed down, but ideally 18 months is a good time to do those 23 units. And they need to be able to access your treatment room. They need to be able to demonstrate their learning of their clinical tasks. Okay. This is really not my area, but training is subsidised by the New South Wales Government under the Smart and Skilled funding. And I'm going to give you the details of UNEP in just a moment. The person that you need to speak to, if you haven't met her in the past, is Margaret Kirby. And Margaret will be happy to take you through all the ways in which you can assist in financing an MPA in your practice. We're very lucky to have worked closely with Hunter New England Central Coast over the past couple of years, and your practice support person is, or your MPA contact at Hunter New England is Sandy. So you can get in touch with Sandy, who's sort of smiling at me right now. And hopefully she will have the answers to the questions about how to get an MPA into your practice. And there are the UNEP details for you with Margaret's phone number, should you wish to speak to her. I'm going to bounce right into the next presentation. We have a Q&A session scheduled for this afternoon, for the end. So at the end of the session today, we have Q&A. So maybe if you want to hold your questions till then, I think that's how that's working, Alison, unless you have any that you wanted to throw at me now before we move into HR. Nothing yet? Okay, so we'll be able to give you some more instructions a little bit later on around how to use that Slido to ask us some questions, and we've allocated some time. So for the next hour or so, we're going to have a look at human resources from hiring to ... and what we need to do, generally speaking, but also specifically around having an MPA employed in your practice. So employing people is a very, very big part of our role as practice managers. And we all get it wrong sometimes, I think. That's to be acknowledged, but there are things that we can do to assist us along the way. And we've got some handouts for you that we will share with you via email. They'll be sent out to you from the PHN to assist you to get this right. It is, I said before, we've seen a lot of staff turnover in the last couple of years. Some areas have been affected more so than others. But it is important, and it's a really important thing to get it right. It's not just a tick box exercise. It takes a lot of skill and it takes a lot of time to get your people right. But I want you to think about this for a moment. This is a quote from Zig Ziglar. And you don't build a business, you build the people. And the people around you are those that build your business. They are the face of your business. And particularly when we're looking at our MPA and our reception staff, they're very much the face of your business. They are, as I said earlier, that very first touch point and that very last touch point for the people that come across, whether it's the phone or whether they're there face to face. Your people are very important. They set the tone, they set the culture, outwardly facing. You as managers or practice owners, practice leaders, set the internal tone and culture, and then that's reflected outwardly by the people that face your, for want of a better word, your customers. So it's really important that you have the right people around you. We see practices that perform well, have really high functioning teams, really high performing teams. It takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of effort from the leaders and managers in the practice to get that right. So just a quick thought about why people might leave their job, why you might have some staff turnover. And obviously, it's not always for money. So this was a survey that LinkedIn did a little while ago. And these were the top answers. So the top reasons why people would move on. And I think quite startlingly for us as managers, those top two answers, I was concerned about the lack of opportunities for advancement, and I was unsatisfied with the leadership of senior management in our practice. So if we're doing our jobs right as practice managers and we're in touch with our staff through regular communication, problem solving, feedback, recognition, then we can reduce this turnover rate. We have a key role and a key position and major opportunity to actually build a sustainable team and stable team. So just to have a little think about that. Okay, so this is employee life cycle. So designing and encouraging an employee experience that leads to longevity, success, and great employment experience should be a permanent mindset in your practice. It vastly reduces resources in terms of money, time, energy, and the benefits of getting it right are really important for our practices. So rather than looking at it as a set and forget, as an employee as a one-time thing. You get them on board and that's it. You need to think about it cyclically. You need to think about it being an ongoing and ever-evolving process in your practice, so that you embed a positive experience into the trajectory of every employee within your practice. So this model is used to visualise how your employees engage with the practice that they are part of, or the business or the entity that they're a part of. And it doesn't stop. Even when they leave, you should have already been thinking about some succession planning. Who do I need? What do I need to fill that role? Okay. So again, this is just a different way of looking at that same life cycle, a different visual, but it's a term used to complete the entire recruiting process from start to finish, and sometimes we hear it referred to as end-to-end recruitment, but it's the recruitment, it's the engagement, and it's the retention, and it's the succession strategies that you have in place in your practice. So these are the requirements that we need to meet. Okay, so we've got, and to be honest, the process is often sometimes the easiest part because it's mandated. We know what we have to do. Fair Work tells us what we have to do. They even have tick lists on their website that you can download. I've done this, I've done this, I've done this. So the process in itself is the easy part. So it's around your, what are the HR requirements of my practice? The recruitment process and the onboarding is all mandated, if not by Fair Work, then by our accreditation processes. It's that staff management that falls to you to do well, falls to the practice to manage well. So the people part, the managing the people part, I think that's the hard part. As practice managers, we have the responsibility to control the elements in our practice, such as culture and environment. Vision. What is the forward vision for this practice? And do our staff know about it? Have we communicated it to them? Do they understand their roles and responsibilities properly? Have we provided the right tools and training that they need? This is all the people management things that we need to be so cognizant of. Before we start any recruitment process, before we commence any process, it's really advisable to do a skills analysis of your organisation. So don't just reactively backfill positions. If a nurse leaves, don't just immediately advertise and recruit and replace with another nurse. Think about, well, is that really what I need in my team? So do a skills analysis. Who have you got doing what? What skills do you have? What are the skill gaps within your practice? So again, if you've got, if you do have a nurse leaving, I challenge you to have a look at the skills in your practice. Could I fill that role with an MPA? Breaking down the tasks and having a look at what the registered nurse was doing. For example, if you've got 2 registered nurses in your practice and one of them moves on, perhaps there's skills that the remaining registered nurse could be pulled into a completely different role for an MPA. And so maybe you only need 1 registered nurse and 1 MPA in your practice. So having the right people in the right place at the right time is the formula for success. Is everyone happy? Have you got full-time people that really, with the full-time role that resigned? Could that actually be a part-time role going forward? So, and I think we all do it. We all do stop and have a look. It is that opportunity to move things around and make sure that your staff, talk to your staff and make sure that they are doing everything that they want to do. Or is this an opportunity to restructure the whole practice and how things are done? So doing that before you actually knee-jerk move into a recruitment process is a really good idea. So when we do move into that recruitment and selection process, The very first thing you do, having worked out what you need in your practice, even before you advertise, is develop a job description, a position description. And I want to talk to you a lot about position descriptions. They are not set and forget documents. They are living documents that need to be constantly adjusted. If you have an MPA in your practice, they are constantly learning new skills. They are constantly performing new tasks and new roles within your practice. And that job description, that position description, has got to be altered accordingly to match their role in the practice. We often get asked the question, as the MPAs are moving through their course and their studies and they become competent in a unit. If you remember, I said earlier that we have 23 units in the course. We often get asked the question, do I have to wait until they've completed, for the 18 months to 2 years, until they've completed those 23 units? The answer is no, you don't. Each of those units are standalone units of competency, and they can be used in your practice as soon as that MPA has that skill. I think ECG is probably a good demonstration, a good example. As soon as they have that competency, as soon as it is signed off, we at UNEP will issue that they'll have a statement of competency that says they are competent to do so. Best thing to do is to get them to start doing ECGs in your practice. If you wait 18 months, 2 years, that's a long time for that skill to lay dormant within their skill set. So get them doing it straight away. But think about your governance framework, think about your compliance, go back to your position description, change the position description that now reflects that that's part of the MPA job role to do so. I want you to think a little bit further outside the box on that one. You need to go back to your induction process. So when you start a new employee in your practice and you induct them into the practice, we take them through everything. We show them how the equipment works. If you had a receptionist that studied to become an MPA, in their induction process, you didn't teach them how to use the ECG machine. You didn't teach them how to use it safely. So you need to go back and induct them into the equipment that they'll now be using. You need to have that paperwork done, apart from anything else, for the safety of your patients, for the safety of your staff, your MPA, for your own risk mitigation strategies. If something goes wrong, the first thing that your medico-legal indemnifier will ask for is evidence. Well, should they have been doing that ECG? Is that a part of their role description? You really want that documented that it was. Well, were they shown how to use the equipment properly? You really want it documented that they were shown how to use that equipment properly. So when you are shifting staff in your practice from one role to another, please go back to your paperwork. It is not set and forget. You need to make sure that you have everything in place. Do I have a question?
Yes, so just remembering with accreditation now that you need to, all clinical staff need to be trained on the equipment that they're using, and the associated risks need to be discussed. So that's also a part of accreditation, that it's not only for your MPA once they get signed off, it's for all of your clinicians using all of the equipment. So just be mindful of that as well, because that's also a new indicator under the 5th edition standards.
Thanks, Kat. So not only is it important, for those of you that might not have been able to hear the beginning of the question, Kat's highlighted the need for this paperwork to be evident for accreditation purposes as well. So I want to extend that probably from the position description, the induction processes, to your training logs. Your training logs are just not an Excel spreadsheet that you fill in just before accreditation. They are actually a strong risk mitigation strategy and very much a part of your HR requirements, that you fill them in, that they're up to date. Because again, if something goes wrong, the first 3 questions: is it part of their job role? Have they been shown how to use the equipment and do it properly? And have they been trained? So all of those things need to be up to date and constantly reviewed. And I think it's a little bit of a, it's a bit of a tough one for us, where we are often upskilling staff in our practice, especially with this role, the MPA role. They will be taking on a lot more skills in your practice that they weren't doing before. And it's really important that you have all that in place to mirror what their new role is. But paperwork is only one part of the process. It's really important that it's communicated, and communicated well, to the rest of the team. your reception staff, your admin staff, everybody needs to know what this new MPA role looks like, okay? The other doctors in the practice, they're going to have a nominated supervisor, so don't assume that everyone outside that nominated supervisor knows what this new role is all about. So communicate the changes in the position description to the entire team, but also communicate the changes in the position to your patients. It's really important that your patients understand this new role in your practice as well. So you would want to be, I don't know, posters in the waiting rooms, a different colour uniform for your MPAs. We've seen it done so many different ways, but the communication around the role is really important. I mean, it's important for all roles in your practices that your patients understand who is who in your team and what they do and what the expectations are for the care that can be delivered by that person in your team. So is it okay to use templates? That's another question we often get asked. Yeah, it is okay to use a template, but that template has got to be tailored to fit your practice. You cannot just fill in a template, shove it in a folder or shove it on a, in a drive electronically and leave it there. They are living documents. So template is okay, but you certainly don't want to deliver a template to your your medico-legal indemnifiers that's got Dandenong Casey of General Practice written on the bottom. So many of us for many, many years were using those templates that were developed firstly for accreditation. It's got to be yours. You've got to own it. That's important. All right, so back to how we might go about employing an MPA, a nurse, into our practice. So we've figured out what our position description is. We've done a skills analysis. What do we want this person to do in our practice? That's when you can move to advertising, because you have a clear idea in your head of what it is you'll want. So your advertising will be much more succinct and you are way more likely to get the person that you need to fill the role if you've done the pre-work first. You obviously move to a short list, and there are many ways that we can do that now. A lot of us are using platforms like Seek that sort of electronically hold all this. If you have a Seek account, that's almost like your filing cabinet for recruitment, to keep everything neat and orderly. You know who you've spoken to, who you haven't spoken to, who you've contacted. If you're not using a platform like that, then you need to keep paper and audit trails. Screening before you move to interview is a really good idea, and I think a lot of us do it by phone before we actually bring people into our practices, is just to have that first initial phone conversation. You will get a feel for fit. You'll get a feel whether it's worthwhile to move to interview or not. Now, interview and your interview process is really important. It is really key to you making sure that you have the right people in the right place. So there are many ways of doing it, and there are many questions that you can ask, but I want to talk to you a little bit about the actual process. I used to bring people in and I would do the formal part of the interview first. And then I would actually take them on a tour of the practice and introduce them to some of the other staff. Until one day, when I didn't employ somebody that I had done with that too, and they said to me, "Oh, I thought because you showed me around and introduced me to everybody that I'd got the job." So that made me stop and think, and I switched my process around. So when my candidates arrive, I take them on a tour of the practice first. And that gives me a really good opportunity to observe. So this isn't me showing them the practice, this is me watching their reaction to my practice. So it gives me a really good first feel. Questions they ask, the way they interact with the staff I may or may not introduce them to. Does this environment feel familiar to them? So I found that quite useful. And also it is a bit of a settling technique as well. So don't get too buddy-buddy about it. Just, simply show them around and gauge their reaction. When doing the interview, the face-to-face interview and the question component itself, there's a few things that you can do to help you get to the right outcome. If you have done the pre-work, you have done your analysis and done your job description well, and your advertising therefore has been targeted to your expectations, and your shortlisting has been targeted to your expectations, then you probably don't need to spend a lot of time in the interview around technical questions. If you have put in your advertising that it's essential that they understand how to use medical software, you don't really need to ask a lot of questions about that during the interview process. The interview process itself is really a time to determine those soft skills. Is this person the right fit for my practice? Yes, they may not be actually telling you the truth about their technical capabilities, but you get another chance to check that when you do referee checks. So a lot of the interview time is spent checking out fit. Are they the right fit for the practice? Obviously a few technical questions, but then, just making sure that you have got the right person in front of you that's going to be a valuable member of your team. So I tend to ask a lot of questions around the softer skills. Somebody asked me once what were my top 3 favourite interview questions, and I actually really only have one. And this one question gives me a lot of answers. And I just simply ask the person, why did you apply for this job? Why us? Why do you want to work here? Well, it kind of is 3 questions, but it's one question with 3 dot points. Why do you want to work here? Why did you apply for the job? And you get a lot out of that question. You will actually get a feel for fit out of that question. So always ask that one. A little bit about their history and what they've been doing before. But always ask that question, why? Why did you apply for this job? Why us? Referee checks. No matter how positive your interview has been, never skip that referee check, because that's where you get to cross-reference the technical things. Can the person actually do what they say they did? And we've got a handout for you. One of the handouts is a list of really good questions to ask when you are performing a referee check. And that's where if the person said they can use best practice, that's where you're going to check. What is their experience with best practice? What was their training in best practice? Are they competent in best practice? And that's where you also get to ask those questions around, did you have any concerns about their performance in your practice? And the $60 million question, obviously, if you had the opportunity, would you employ them again? But as I said, we do have a handout for you around questions for interviewing. So you will get that after the session. It's really important that you then start the formal process by issuing that letter of appointment that can be attached to the contract. But if you're going to be a bit slow getting your contract together, can I suggest that you do issue a letter of appointment that formalises it? Because without a contract, your prospective employers might get a bit nervous and might move on, which is, you don't want to have to go back to ground zero again. So getting that paperwork out fairly quickly is important. Onboarding, I have talked about the induction process a little bit in terms of making sure that you treat it as a living experience in your practice, but it is important that you onboard your new team members effectively. And that part of that onboarding process, again, is communicating to the rest of the team what this new job role looks like, especially if you have changed it. So if you had a receptionist in a role and then you decided to move to an MPA and that role is now different, make sure that everyone in the team understands. Otherwise, their expectations of what that person could do in your practice are not going to marry up. That will cause confusion and perhaps some unhappiness. So make sure that your induction process is a thorough one. When you are doing an induction process, the other thing that I seriously suggest that you do is that the paperwork, and there must be paperwork, is signed and that it's understood. Okay, again, an important part of your risk management strategy. Your medico-legal indemnifiers are going to ask you, well, did you train them? Do they understand what they have to do? Did they understand what their job role was? If you show them an induction checklist that's not signed, the next question will be, well, did the employee actually understand this? So you need a signature around a sentence that says, I have completed my induction and I understand what my role is in this practice, or I understand how to use this equipment, and making sure that you have that, so that you place yourself in a defensible situation. So we don't often think of our induction and our HR paperwork as part of our risk strategy, as part of our legal requirements and risk mitigation strategies, but I can assure you they very much are. And we know that good documentation equals good defence, should things go wrong. Okay, so apart from meeting compliance, a good induction program and a good onboarding process is critical to the success of the performance of your new employee. So the number one reason for what motivates staff, as reported by a Gallup poll, was that they know what's expected of them. They need to know what's expected of them. So just showing them where their bag goes and where the toilet is not enough. Your induction process has to be comprehensive and, again, signed and understood. Do they know? Do they understand? And do they agree to your expectations of this role? It's also an opportunity for you to instill the philosophy, the culture, the mission and the values of your practice into your new employee. Just as important as how to turn on the computer and what the passwords are. Sometimes more so. In fact, a lot more so. This human resource management component is the part that I was talking about that's not really mandated. This is the part that we need to get right internally. And it's going to look a little bit different in every practice, but the fundamentals are the same. All right. I said earlier that practice managers have the responsibility to control elements of culture in our practice. What does our practice feel like? What is the environment like to work in? What is the vision of the practice? Okay. What are the employees' perceptions and understanding of their roles and responsibilities? So, as always, it's one thing to actually pass this information on to, didactically tell people what they need to know, but it's got to be a two-way process. They have to have buy-in. And it's often worthwhile in that induction process asking several times, does this feel right for you? Does this feel like it's going to be the right fit for you? And getting that upfront buy-in from your new employee, that they actually are committed to your expectations and your culture. It doesn't end with onboarding a new employee. Training staff is, again, training and development, and I said earlier about training logs. It's a crucial risk mitigation strategy, and you have to be constantly addressing it. Now, where you've introduced an MPA into your practice, they've come to you, they've got that unit of competency, they know how to do the ECG. Okay, so someone outside your organisation has said, yeah, they are competent and skilled at this task. But I think it's incumbent upon us inside our organisations to actually make sure that we agree with the qualification. And certainly for the person who is supervising that MPA role to actually, and I did say earlier, it could be direct or indirect. But initially, I don't know, as a supervisor, as an RN who has the responsibility for supervising an MPA, I would be wanting to make sure that I felt they were competent before I let them loose on their own in the treatment room. And I would be documenting that. So a simple checklist that from a supervisor, that's every 3 months, eyes on. I watched them doing this ECG and yes, I agree that they were competent in performing this task. That's a training strategy in your practice. Keep it in your training logs, document it, that their direct supervisor is actually revisiting that competency. We all get a little bit lazy. And if your MPA is exposed to multiple different clinicians, doctors, RNs in your practice, They all have a different way of doing things. And whilst there is always more than one way to skin a cat, it's really important that those tasks are being performed as per the policies and procedures of your practice. So any MPAs that might be online that have actually been in a classroom with me, I say that all the time. Okay, there is more than one way to do this. When you are working in a practice, you must perform it according to the policies and procedures of that practice. And that is a responsibility of the supervisor, someone who has the role of supervisor for your MPA, would wanting to make sure that that's happening and would wanting to be documenting it. So once again, where's the job description? Where's the induction process? Where's the training? Where's the ongoing training? And a simple supervisor log, with a 3-month check. I checked in again and I agree that this task is being performed competently as per the policy and procedures of this practice. It's gold in terms of risk mitigation strategy. It will get you out of trouble almost every time. So training and ongoing development is really important for all your staff. But when you're introducing, again, it's not a set and forget. It's not I trained them once and I know they know how to do it, especially when you've got a supervisory situation going on. I would want to see at least twice a year that we've gone back to check, that everyone's comfortable that they're doing it competently as per our expectations. Training increases the efficiency of all your staff, but it also increases staff retention. They feel comfortable. Your staff will feel comfortable, they will secure, they will feel empowered, and they will feel valued in your practice. And that's really important. Your staff are one of your greatest costs. They are an enormous cost in a practice. So my advice is that you make them your greatest asset. That just makes good business sense. And performance management. Let's have a little chat about performance management. Our favourite job as a practice manager, performance management. Most of us dread it, but done well, it can be the single most useful HR tool you have. So again, my challenge to you is to learn to love it. We've moved a long way from terminology of performance management to performance conversation. We've moved from set templates to it has to fit your practice. It has to be, again, yes, you need to document it, and there are a few templates out there, but are they what really work for your staff? Not necessarily. So we see it done so many ways, from informally to formally, and I don't believe it matters how you do it, as long as you do it and as long as it's documented. Because if you need to revisit the appropriateness of an employee in your practice, if you don't have this performance management documentation, then you have made life very, very hard for yourself. So again, it's not about the paperwork, it's actually about the conversation that you have had with your employees. And I think to take a positive slant on it, it's more important to take it from the viewpoint of this is not about what you're not doing well, this is about what you are doing well and what you might like to improve in. So what skills would you like to do that you're not doing well, or that you're not actually having the opportunity to do? I think this is really important, again, when we think about MPAs. You are going to have a very, very frustrated team member, an employee, if you've got an MPA that is learning new skills, that is gaining competency, that can actually perform the task legally, and you're not allowing them to in your practice. They're going to get very frustrated and very unhappy, and you're probably going to experience some of that staff turnover that we talked about. Or you're going to have a disgruntled team, and that's the last thing any of us want. So asking that question, do you think that you are doing all the tasks or all the skills? Are we giving you the opportunity to work to the top of your scope, or to do the things that you want to do here in the practice? and really change that conversation so that it's not about what you're not doing well. It's about what else would you like to do? What else do you think you can bring to the table? And what training do you need to do that? Taking that opportunity to recognise that person's personal attributes. I've noticed that you interact really well with the patients. So, I'm going to make your role will be more of a marketing one. You are, the face of the practice. Or I've noticed that it's probably not your skill set. You really just like to put your head down and get on with the work. We need all these different skills in our practice. So making sure that the job roles that we have actually fit the person's skills and their personal attributes that they bring to our team. We said really at the very beginning, it's the people that we have around us that build our team, and they're going to build a good business if they're doing the things that they like to do. Always, of course, they will need to meet the expectations of the business and of their job role. So you can't always give them everything they want. There are certain jobs that need to be done that always aren't much fun, and you just have to, find a way to balance that so that they are doing some of the things that they like. When you are doing performance management, the best tool that you can use is a set of key performance indicators. So what are the KPIs for this job role, for this person? Those KPIs will come from your job description. And that's another handout that we actually have for you after today's session, is some examples of what some good KPIs might be. So if we're thinking about our MPAs and their job description is quite a vast and broad one, because they have admin tasks and they have clinical tasks, and we have a lot of expectations of them in the practice because I've built them up to be the best person that you will ever have, then their KPIs are going to have to reflect the entirety of the role. So you're going to have some admin KPIs and you're going to have some clinical KPIs that you're expecting them to meet. So making sure that you have given them, they know what their KPIs are, they know what their key performance indicators are, so they know the measure of are they doing a good job as per your expectations. And they know that long before you sit down and have a conversation with them. But as I said, it shouldn't be any surprise to them because the KPIs are pulled from their job description, from their position description. Take the performance management conversation opportunity as a time to review the role itself with the employee. Do they have enough resources to do their job properly? Is their working environment suitable? Are they, comfortable at the front desk? Does everything work for them? And if we're thinking about an MPA, it's a good opportunity to ask them about the relationship between them and their supervisor. Do they feel they're getting enough supervision, or do they feel they're getting too much supervision? And finding that balance, right? So again, your performance conversation can encompass all those different things that you might not take the time to stop and have the conversation about. It's a good opportunity to not only identify if more training is required, and this might come out of your conversation around supervision. So for your MPAs in your practice, if the MPA says to you, oh my God, they never let me do anything on my own, they're constantly watching me, that's a bit of a flag to think, well, is the person who's supervising them worried about their skill? Are they not doing this as well as they should be? Do they need some extra training and upskilling for everyone to feel comfortable that they can now do this in the practice? So there's a wealth of information that comes out of these performance conversations. And that's why I challenge you, rather than dread them, to love them, because they can actually make your job a whole lot easier. You are not navigating through problems. You are way ahead of the curve and way ahead of the problem, and actually putting strategies in place that will assist you to have that really high performing team that we know makes such a massive difference. All right, so just some practical performance management tips from your perspective as a manager who's actually doing the performance management, don't wait until just before the performance management to actually be gathering information about your employee. That also is not a set and forget, it's an ongoing thing. So you're constantly, looking at their accomplishments, looking at any problems that might be arising and jotting them down. If you've got a big team, you're potentially not going to remember what you saw being done really well. So it's almost like a diary, I guess, for yourself of each of your employees. It may not need to be dealt with then and there at the time, but actually making a note of it for yourself. Actually, I can shelve that for the performance conversation I know is coming up in about 3 or 4 months' time. It's not a big issue, so I'm not going to go into it today, but we'll talk about it. We'll have a chat about it when we get to it. But I don't know, if you're anything like me, I suggest you write it down because I won't remember when the performance time comes around. And it actually makes that performance conversation a lot more real and a lot more useful and a lot more robust rather than grappling around for things to find to talk about. So I do that. So that's part of my preparation, is to kind of have a running diary on my employees so that I've actually got a whole 12 months worth of information to base that performance conversation on. Obviously, if things are not great, you can't wait for a performance management schedule time to deal with it. You actually have to deal with it straight away. Be objective. Sometimes the goals of your employee, their expectations and yours won't match. They will be different, but you have to be quite objective about that. You can't promise things that you can't deliver, or that's one of the worst things you can do. So being objective, being honest, being upfront. I don't like ratings. For a long while there was strategy where you give your employee a piece of paper and ask them to rate themselves 1 to 5 on how they do things in your practice. And then you would also do that rating activity and then you would cross-reference the two. I think that that's not useful at all, and it's not really something that you would want to document or keep. It's a lot more useful to have a conversation with someone and ask them, how do you think you're going? No one's ever, if they're doing it really, really well, they're not going to give themselves the top score anyway, because then whoever's doing the performance management will think they're full of themselves, so they're not going to do that. So the tool itself is not useful. So have a conversation. Some of the questions were okay, but target them to the role. These rating templates tend to be very generic, whereas your performance conversation should be very much specific to the role itself. So if we're thinking about our MPAs, you're going to be asking them both questions around how they're doing administratively in their reception role or their admin role, whatever you've got them doing in your practice, but you're also going to be asking them questions about how they're going clinically with some of their clinical tasks. So there's no template that's going to cover off on all of that. So I'm not a fan of a rating system or tool at all. Don't be afraid to identify high performance. If people are doing really well, then let them know. And don't always wait to the performance conversation. I think it's much better to say to them, I've said to you a couple of times over the last few months how impressed we are with how you're doing this. And now that we're sitting down formally, I just want to emphasize it. I'm documenting it. It's going in your HR file that you're actually doing a really good job at this task. Focus on improvement. I talked a little bit about that. So it's not about you're actually really bad, your phone manner's really bad. You actually have to think about, well, how can we actually improve the way that you answer the phone? How can we do it better? Do you need, some upskilling on how important you are in terms of marketing in this practice? Those sorts of things. So focus on improvements. Plan for ongoing development. There is no law that says performance conversations have to be every 12 months. In fact, some of the best strategies and best teams that I've seen, they're checking in frequently But you would make that determination at the performance conversation. If it was 12 months because it's a long-term employee and everything's fine, so be it. But if not, you might say, you know what, I think we'll check in again at the 6-month mark and just make sure that this has got better for you, that you're now feeling more competent in the role, more secure, happier. If we reflect back on the example I used about an MPA being supervised, you'd check back in a few months' time and and make sure that that situation had settled down and that the MPA felt that they weren't being eyes on all the time, that their supervisor actually had some confidence in them. You most certainly would not leave at 12 months to have that conversation again. And set goals and objectives. You know, something that you can reflect back on when you do meet again with this person, setting some new goals, what they're going to do and what it's going to look like next time that you do sit down together and take that time to sit down. Underperformance, I already said don't leave it. If there is an underperformance, the gap needs to be identified and managed at that point in time, or as close to that point in time as is possible. Determine the source, okay? Don't work with hearsay. You actually need to determine the source of the problem. So if a doctor is complaining to you about an MPA or a nurse, it might not be the MPA or the nurse that's doing the thing wrong. It might be the doctor's expectations are not correct. So find out, where is the problem really? Identify where the problem is coming from. And if the problem is that the doctor doesn't understand the MPA role, then it's their expectations around that role that need to be addressed and not the way the MPA is doing the role itself. So it's really important that you actually go to the root cause. And then, of course, figure out what your course of action is. So if it is, as I just said, if it is the expectations are incorrect, then we need to do some work around communication in the practice. We need everyone to understand what the MPA role is. If there is a real gap in performance, identify the gap. Where is the gap in the performance? So this is about where the employee is performing at the moment and what your expectations are, where you need them to be, and what is that gap and what can you do to address it. If it's simply a skills gap, that's the easy one, because you can get more training, internal or external, and bring them up to speed on your expectations. If it's an attitude gap or a soft skill gap, then it's a little bit more of a problem, and that's when you're going to go back to the source and find out, does the employee actually commit to the values, the visions, and the culture of your practice. Be open, honest, and transparent when you are having underperformance discussions. Be unemotional. Don't be emotional. Be objective. We've already said that. If it's a training issue, fix it. Fix it as quickly as you can. And create a win-win situation. So it's a win for the employee to have the underperformance corrected, and it's obviously a win for the practice to have it corrected. Focusing on ways to improve communication, to increase productivity, and therefore your whole of practice in performance happens when you empower your people. Good managers know that they can't do everything. They know that they have to put the right people around them, and they empower them to do so, to do their job well, so the whole of the team is achieving. If you have a real performance issue, performance management issue, and you feel that you have exhausted the extent of your own capacity and capability to manage it, then please don't hesitate to seek experienced support, because you cannot afford to get performance management wrong. It's really important that you get it right. And there's a lot of help out there. Some of it is costly, but some of it is not. And I suggest that you can go to Fair Work as a first port of call. They have a lot of resources on their web page. They have a lot of fact sheets, and they will actually have generic type conversations with you, just to build your own capability to manage it. If you are an AAPM member, then that HR advisory service is there to help you, and they will help you with specific problems about how to manage performance. And of course, make sure you document everything that you do. It's really important that you have that documentation trail that's dated and what the outcomes were of any conversations that you had. Okay, I said right up front that there's a lot of legislation that governs what we do. So Fair Work, obviously, we all know about. Equal employment opportunity. This is a question, this comes into play, and it's a question that we sometimes get around when we are recruiting, and we don't actually, and we go through an interview process. You're probably going to interview about 3 people. You're only going to employ 1 of them. What do you say to the unsuccessful candidates? And I think it's really important that you understand EEO at that point in time, because you can't actually tell them that you employed someone because they're younger than you and I think they're going to stay here longer. That's not a good reason. It is a simple statement of there was a better candidate on the day, or you say very little at all, and it can be quite difficult when they come back to you and ask for feedback. And you just have to, have your sentence, have your script, and just say, look, on the day there was a more appropriate candidate for the role, and you have to leave it at that. Otherwise, you will find yourself in very deep and uncharted water. Obviously, privacy laws, anti-discrimination, work health and safety, tax laws, superannuation, the compliance goes on, and this is just HR. So we know how much compliance and legislation that we deal with in our practices. And I just wanted to finish up with a comment about casual employees, and I think most of us are on top of this now, but the new legislation was introduced, and it's really important that you are on top of this, because we have case law in front of us now where our casual employees have actually been deemed to be part-time employees, and that can be a very costly exercise for a practice. The Fair Work Commission will help you to deal with disputes. But basically, we need to make sure that, I guess it's that old adage, if it smells like a duck and quacks like a duck, it is a duck. So we need to understand the definition of a casual employee. And a casual employee has no guarantee from day to day of ongoing employment. So every day that they work, it's like a new contract. So you can't have them rostered on regularly, weeks in advance, months in advance, because that expectation of work can't be there for them to be truly deemed a casual. Years in advance in some cases. So you need to really understand what a definition of a casual employee is. And if you have casual employees in your practice that really are performing a part-time role, then you need to go down the road of offering them casual conversion. They don't have to take it, but there's a process where you really need to have it well documented that it was offered and not accepted. And I urge you to go to those websites there, if you haven't done so already, and have a really good look around what it is you need to do with employees who you think may be casual in your practice. I've actually reached the end of what I wanted to say to you. Any questions? Sandy, do we have any questions on Slido, or will we just keep going and save them all for the end? No questions. All right, that means we can move into our next session.
Do they want to do a 5-minute break so we can set up, or just go straight into it?
Yeah, we do have a little bit of fiddling to do for our next session, where we're actually going to, for those MPAs that are online today, do a little bit of a refresher on asepsis and actually demonstrate aseptic technique when doing wound management. So if you want to grab a cup of tea, glass of water, it will take us about no longer than 5 minutes to set up for the next session.
Good morning. Thank you for having us. So my name's Kat Ryan and I'm going to run through how to clean a wound using live aseptic technique. So first, we'll just run through the definition of asepsis. So asepsis is the absence of germs such as bacteria, viruses, or other microorganisms that can cause disease. So that means that essentially, whenever you're cleaning a wound, you don't want to be bringing in any sort of bacteria into the wound. So you don't want to be touching something that's dirty and then touching your clean and sterile wound. So asepsis, an asepsis technique, is always making sure that we're not bringing anything extra into the wound that shouldn't be there. So how to maintain asepsis. So we want to use aseptic non-touch technique, which means that we're not touching anything within the dressing pack or anything extra that should be there. So everything should be sterile in the dressing pack. And it's a critical component of infection control in wound care, as I said, because you don't want to be bringing those extra bacteria into the wound by accident. So we need to ensure that we're keeping all areas clean, and we always want to make sure that we don't allow any areas to become dirty. So before we get started, I just want to run through some of these principles of sterility. So we always want to make sure that we never turn our back on a sterile field. So when I open the dressing tray, I'll explain what a sterile field is. We never reach over a sterile field. We make sure that sterile objects can become non-sterile if you leave them, if they're exposed, if they're prolonged, if they're exposed too long to airborne microorganisms. So for example, if you unpack a dressing pack and you're halfway through doing a wound dressing and for some reason you get called away and it sits there for 10 or 15 minutes, that might be a long time that it's been exposed to airborne microorganisms. So you may decide that you want to pack that away and you want to reopen a new sterile dressing pack to ensure that it's sterile to continue dressing the wound. So skin can't be sterilised and it's non-sterile. And before we get started, we always ensure sterility of packs. So we make sure that on the front of the dressing pack it says that it's sterile. We'll check the expiry dates and make sure that there's no damage, that the seal hasn't been tampered with. So now we're going to move on to setting up a sterile dressing field. So, yep. So I'll get started. Can you zoom in or you'll keep it out? Yep. So first I'll pop some gloves on and then I need to wipe down my workstation. So in this case, I'm using a table. If I was in the clinic, I would be wiping down a trolley. And then you get your disinfectant wipes and then using a S-wipe motion. So you want to make sure that you're never crossing from dirty to clean. So we'll use an S-wipe motion to wipe, making sure that we're not accidentally going back across ourselves. And then we'll remove the wipe and gloves. And I realised I forgot the first step of hand hygiene. I've got all my little bits and bobs behind. So first I should have done hand hygiene, then the gloves. It's a bit tricky when everything's hidden behind the lectern. Now I won't be able to get my gloves back on. It's always when you have an audience that you can never get gloves back on onto wet hands.
Note to self next time, bring a size larger than you need.
I know. And it never happens like this when you're at work. It just goes on. It's the joy of having different
There we go.
hand gel too. All right. Okay, so now we're going to set up our dressing, set up our sterile field. So as I was saying before, I'm not sure if you'll be able to read on it, you want to make sure that the pack is sterile. So usually on the front of the pack it will say sterile. We might
almost be getting there. We want to make sure that it's sealed, that it hasn't been contaminated, hasn't accidentally been opened. So we'll open the pack. And then as we move along, we want to keep popping things into the bin as we go. We'll pop the pack down, and there's usually a tab on the pack, and you always want to make sure that you're working away so you're not going across the field. So we'll grab the tab, we gently pull it away. And each dressing pack is slightly different. So when we're opening a dressing pack, always the edges, the 2 to 3 centimetres to the edge are considered contaminated, and the inside of the field is considered to be sterile. So once we've got our dressing pack set up, some dressing packs, in this dressing pack you'll see in a moment, there's 3 sets of forceps. So 2 are this aqua colour and 1 is yellow, which we'll find in a second. In some dressing packs, as you open them, there might be that single set of forceps that is a different colour, and that's called a transfer forceps. So that's what we can use to touch the bits and bobs in this dressing pack before we get started. But in our dressing pack, how this has come, it's right at the bottom. So I'll need to gently tip the dressing tray over so I can get access to it, and ensuring that I'm not touching the centre of the sterile dressing pack. So I'll just gently tip it over and bring it back, only touching the edges. And you need to be mindful when you're picking up the forceps that you only pick up the ends, so you're not touching anything closer. So we'll just pop everything out so I can get access to everything that I need. Okay, and then these are considered to be dirty because they've been touching other bits and pieces. So now that we've assembled everything that we need, we'll pop them in the bin. And I need a dressing to pop under Kathy's arm, so I'll open this now. So we ensure that we open the dressing and we don't touch it, and we just gently place it onto the sterile field to ensure that it's still sterile. If I can get into it with my gloves that aren't fitting properly. It's nothing like having a room full of people trying to watch you open something. Do it 100 times at work and you never have a problem, and then when there's all eyes. Okay, so I'll just gently open that and pop it down, and then I'll pop the waste into the bin. And I'll need some saline, so I'll be using some saline to clean the wound first. So I'll undo the top, and I'll just gently pour some saline into one of these smaller pots, ensuring that it doesn't splash onto the sterile field. If I was needing to use that again, I would sit it onto the table. You would never sit it onto the sterile field because the bottom of the saline container is not sterile, so you'd always want to keep it off your sterile field. However, I won't need it for the rest of this demonstration, so I'll pop it away. If you were using saline that was in a container that had a lid, you would unscrew the lid and face the lid up. You would gently pour the saline into the pot, bring it back up and pop the lid back on, screw it and sit it away, not in your sterile field. So now I've got everything set up. So now I'm going to remove these gloves and I'll perform hand hygiene again, and then I'll get my patient ready. So I'm taking my gloves off, into the bin, performing hand hygiene, so I'll wash my hands. See if I can get some gloves back on. Nope. The longest part of this demonstration is going to be me putting gloves on. Okay, so now that I've got my gloves on, we like to move in a triangle, so we want to be going from the dressing pack to the patient to the bin. So this is a bit of an awkward setup, but we'll see how we go. So, I'll pick up my forceps and I'll get a swab and I'll wet it a little bit. I'll pop off the excess and then I will wipe across the wound once in a downward motion, and then that's it. I will discard. And then, pardon? Yes, and because my forceps are dirty now, I'll pop them onto the edge of I'll sit them down onto my sterile field, and whenever you have to sit forceps down, you always sit them so that the handle's just to the edge, because that 2 to 3 centimetres to the edge of the field is what's considered dirty. So I can pick things up and pop things down, but I shouldn't be placing them anywhere within the sterile field. So now I should have pulled them out earlier too. I'll pick up if I get it out, to have my second set of forceps. So if I'm right-handed, so I use my right hand to pick up a swab to clean things. I can use my left hand with the forceps to pick up the dressing, pop it back down with the handles out to the edge, and now I'll pop my dressing onto the patient. Pardon?
A chicken wound.
Yes, so I'll pop it over Kathy's chicken burn wound. So with this dressing, you just pop it on and it has a second film layer. It's a waterproof dressing. So where this blue bit is, we just peel the top off. So now we've completed it. So whenever we're working, we always want to be working from the dressing tray to the patient and then away to the bin, always making sure that things aren't crossing back. So our next slide, I'll leave my gloves on to show you this because this is part of it. So ways to contaminate a sterile field. So for example, had I have touched the computer and come back to the sterile field, that is one way to contaminate it. So if ever you're having to do something, if the phone rings, if you have to touch something, you'll need to take your gloves off, perform hand hygiene, do whatever that other thing is, whether it's answering the phone, accessing the computer, then you would come back. So as we run through, I'll just quickly grab, I should have left the saline out. So the first one says splashing on a sterile field. So for example, if we have too much vigour and if it splashes onto the sterile field, that is considered to be contaminated. You would then have to stop, pack everything up, open a new field, start again, because the water could seep through and become a vehicle of contamination. If we leave the bottle, I've just thrown it away again, if we happen to leave the bottle on the sterile field, because this bottle is non-sterile, we don't know where the bottom of the bottle has been. So if we're leaving it on our sterile field and if things are touching and if it's touching things, then it's non-sterile. So we always want to make sure that the only part of the sterile field we're touching is the edges and everything else in between should be sterile. So using transfer forceps as a sterile forceps. So that first yellow forceps that I had, as I've been moving things, if I was starting to use that as a sterile forceps, it's considered dirty and non-sterile. So you should never be using that single transfer forceps. When we're talking about our sterile forceps that we're using, for example, you don't want to leave them sitting in the tray, because as you go to pick them up, you may touch the edge of the tray, and that may contaminate your sterile tray, sterile field. And sometimes there might be dressings that you're sitting that you need to fold up, so you might accidentally touch some of the gauze swabs, or you might accidentally touch other bits and pieces. So generally you don't want to leave forceps sitting in the tray. You always want to leave them sitting to the edge, so you're just picking up the edge and they're not randomly sitting here and you're not picking them up and touching. So when you start to open the dressing pack, I was trying to just gently grab the edges. So you want to make sure that you're only touching the edges of the dressing pack, not that you're touching in the middle, or that you're sort of accidentally touching the tray as you open it. And then any waste, if you have any waste that comes into contact with the dressing tray as you're going through it. So if you unpack the gauze, or if you unpack a dressing, if you accidentally touch it, just be mindful whether you need to throw that out or not. And then once gloves are on, ensure that you don't touch anything. So you don't touch your seat, you don't touch the table, you don't touch a phone or your computer, because you'll be contaminating yourself. If you do happen to touch any of those things, make sure that you remove the gloves, repeat hand hygiene, and pop on a new set of gloves. And there's another little tip: you can put your hands in the prayer position to make sure that you don't accidentally pop your gloves on and move across, so you're not accidentally touching things. Anyway, so that brings us to the end of our wound care demonstration. Have we got any questions regarding this? Has anything come through? No questions, okay. So I'll just quickly pop some, I've just done hand hygiene again, and I'll quickly pop some gloves back on and I'll pack everything up. So now that we've finished, so this dressing pack does come with a sharp, so we would pop that into the sharps container, and everything else would be folded up. And so if anything has a bodily fluid, if that's blood or anything like blood or urine or tissue, that would be considered to be contaminated waste, bio waste. So you would be popping that into your yellow bio waste bin, and anything in terms of the other bits and bobs of the dressing pack on your gloves and things that haven't been contaminated with blood samples would go into normal general waste. Is there anything you want to add? No. Okay, so that brings us to the end of our wound care dressing. So we're just going to have a short break, and we'll be back at 12. We'll be back at 12 o'clock, and then our next presentation is on optimization of the MPA. So thank you.